A lot of new developers adopt several unhealthy, self defeating habits early in their career that prevent them from growing as quickly as they could. They either sabotage their own success by refusing to ask for help early and often, or sabotage their own growth by only grabbing easy tasks, or sabotage their own health by not pushing back on unrealistic expectations. It's all because of their own fear of failure or being perceived as incompetent, which oddly enough causes both to happen. So that's why today we're talking about the best ways for new developers to grow in their career. To walk through these career growth strategies, my guest today is Brian Jenney, an engineering manager and owner of Parsity, which is an online coding school that turns career changers into full stack web developers. And to help with your growth, he's offering our listeners 50% off of their Dev 30 program, which is a coding course focused on growing your skills, mindset, habits, and network. So just use the link in the show notes and tell them that you heard about them from the Junior Jobs podcast to get your discount. Many juniors in their first role are scared. They're just trying to survive. Their entire focus is on the short-term successful completion of the immediate task at hand. But there's so much they can do and should do at the start to set themselves up for their optimal career growth. Brian, what would you say those activities are?
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to write a post about. I think more software developers would use the book "How to Win Friends and Influence People" rather than like you don't know JavaScript series at some point in their career. I think that beyond the technical foundation, which is a given essentially when you get hired, we expect to have a technical foundation, obviously, but the things that are going to set you apart and make your career, give you the leverage in your career that you're going to need, things like communication, project management, general leadership skills, public speaking, I think is not talked about enough, but these are the kind of things I see that are really going to propel you further as you get past junior, move into mid-level and want to eventually get into senior and then open up and expand towards leadership if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talk about, communication and things. How does a junior developer really achieve that when at least initially a lot of their tasks are very much individual contributor tasks? They're by themselves.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily are given a lot of opportunities to show leadership and communication skills. How can they craft those opportunities so that they can show those skills?
Yeah, and I'm trying to think. I hired a couple junior engineers. I've actually hired more than a few over the years, and I've helped to hire some and interview them. And I'm thinking about the ones that really stood out. And there was a few along the years, especially the two I recently hired. And I'm thinking like, how did they just make those opportunities happen on the team where they came in? They were the newest people, super junior, didn't know much. A lot of times they started with documentation. A lot of times just initiative. And I think people overestimate how talkative developers are. Like I'm sure maybe on your team, you have a question and it goes silent. Developers are typically not the most like talkative people. So it doesn't take much in a meeting to stand out, I think a lot of times. Sometimes just their inquisitiveness, like when you genuinely ask, "Hey, why are you doing something that way?" Like saying, "Hey, here's the task we're gonna do." "Oh, I'm curious. Why are you doing that?" Or "What does this do?" "Hey, can I shadow somebody?" "Is there an on-call? Can I shadow the person on-call right now?" "Oh, there's a critical issue." The more you volunteer and things like that and are just inquisitive and ask people to shadow them or look into code, that sets you apart immediately. And then if you do things like documentation, like saying, "Hey, I'm onboarding," perfect opportunity for you to go in and say, "Oh, I noticed the onboarding docs are missing this. I'm willing to do it." And then this makes you stand out immediately without even writing any code. You could actually be not a great developer and
Yeah.
stand out doing some of these things.
And it's probably gotten a lot worse with the growth of remote work, at least from my experience. You can put 10 developers in a room in person, and at least there's a conversation.
Yeah.
But with 10 developers on a Zoom call with 80% of them with their video off, one person presenting, it can be, radio silent for a while.
I think we're working at the same company. I think we're all working at the
That's
same
right.
company.
That's right. So, um, if you're able to, you should share your video is like an initial one. That really helps people to develop a relationship with you.
That's a
Um,
that's an underrated move right there. Power move
yeah,
right
yeah.
there. Keeping your
And
camera
be
on.
focused in the conversation, not, looking at
Seriously.
your other screens.
Yeah, people
Uh,
underestimate that kind of stuff, and I think especially, like, now that I'm a manager, like, people may think I have more confidence in it, but I'm looking around the room too to see, like, how are people gauging what I'm saying? Am I right? Am I wrong? Are they giving me that visual feedback and cues that I need as a human to know that I'm making sense, right?
mhm, mhm. And then as far as your contribution, I just want to emphasize just asking questions. We had a junior developer on our team lately who I'm so grateful for him. He asked a question about some of the acceptance criteria that I wrote in a ticket. Uh, and ended up I was wrong. I made some assumptions. The code was a little bit different than what I thought. And I'm so grateful that when things didn't necessarily jive in his head, that he reached back out and asked for clarification. Because I have worked with developers in the past who, well, that's what the ticket says, so that's what
Yes.
I'm gonna do. And like they intentionally write, buggy software, and then they blame somebody else for it.
Yeah.
And like take some ownership of the work that you're building. We're all a team here. I'm not a perfect human being. I need help. So please reach out and ask clarifying questions if you don't understand.
Yeah. Critical thinking. I mean, just general like taking ownership. Yeah, having that idea of extreme ownership. I've heard people call it. But yeah, ideally like thinking, does this make sense at some level? And then deciding whether or not to get feedback, communicate with people. That's like the difference between like the code robot and your senior developer at a certain point.
Mhm. And no matter what career growth looks like for you, whether it's going into management or going into like principal engineer or architect, the ability to ask those clarifying questions and showing your own leadership and extreme ownership is going to be helpful no matter what track you go down.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we talk about different career paths here and growth here. For a junior developer, what are all the different like career growth options that are even available to them, and what are perhaps some of the different activities they can do to kind of target a specific growth opportunity?
Yeah, and I know at larger companies and more tech-focused companies, it's more well structured. Like they have like leveling documents, and you can say, "Oh, I'm an L1, L2, L3, and I'm going to go to staff or principal." And there's a technical leadership path and a people management path. I've worked mostly, we're kind of a mix of really small startups. Now I'm at a large company, and there's not so much of this like well thought out track. I had to actually create it myself. But what I do see from talking with so many developers is they generally have a couple options, right? When you're junior, your main focus is to continue getting more technical foundation, getting better at writing code and understanding the software systems and software development lifecycle so you can get to senior. That's kind of the first stop in your road. You have to get to senior. Because then at that point, it opens up, okay, where do you want to go? Technical track, maybe architect, and that can split off in a couple paths too, like architect or maybe like staff level and going to principal. Or do you want to try the people management track? Which is an interesting one because now I went that track, even though I started going the technical track and went to staff engineer. And then I thought, I like people. I like managing people. I like the mentorship aspect. And I found out that I actually kind of had a knack for project management. I mean, and I saw that that was something the company needed, and they needed me on that track more than they needed me on the staff track. So then I went down the people management track. And I do see those as the split that most people need to decide where to make. And I think most engineers I speak with, they actually don't want to go into people management. They want to go into the technical track. I think those are generally more well thought out and planned, like what's expected at that stage. Like, okay, staff, you're going to be, or team lead, then staff engineer. And then from staff engineer, you can go to principal or, solutions architect or something like that.
Yeah. And by default, if you do nothing and just kind of go with the flow of your company, from my experience, you're going to go into management. That's
Yeah.
like the default promotion path.
Which is
So
not
if
a
you
good one either, a lot of times, because a lot of people have no business managing people. And they're like, you're the best engineer on the team. Now you're going to manage the team.
Yeah, which is surprising, right? Somebody who, yes, you know the subject matter that you are managing, but it's an entirely different skill set.
I learned
And for the
that the
first
hard
few
way.
years, you're going to feel like you suck, and you probably will suck. You're
I'm
gonna,
just getting out of that stage. I'm like thinking, okay, I think I kind of, because at first I came in confident. I'm like, okay, I was pretty good, senior software engineer. I was getting the staff. I felt like I was making the right changes. People management. I'm like, wait, what do I do? What do people expect? What am I supposed to do? Are people happy? Do they
Mhm.
like what I'm doing? Then I started coding too much, and I fell back into that trap. It was rough.
It's the first exposure for me to what I would consider some of the failures of the education system. Well, I say that just broadly in the sense that you grow up, so much of your life is the teacher. There's one person who knows the right answer.
Hmm.
There's a book with the answer key that you can check your answers against. The assignments are well defined with concrete deadlines. And as a junior developer, you kind of still operate in that world.
Yes.
Uh, but then once you hit management, you realize nobody knows the answer. There
Yeah.
is no right answer, even in most cases.
Yeah.
The scope of the problem statement or the deadlines are all negotiable, and we're all just making it up as we go.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more ambiguity that maybe somebody's more technically minded may be uncomfortable living in.
That's kind of the interesting part. As ambiguity grows, so does your salary and pay. Like the more ambiguous and nebulous problems you can kind of distill into actionable things, that's what you get paid a lot of money for, in my opinion.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So in that career progression, you're going to hit a point where you're going to have to talk about salary
Oh yeah,
and negotiate that salary.
you better.
So as a junior developer with 0 years of experience, even initially, um, you could argue you have also zero leverage or very little leverage in that conversation.
You could, yeah.
Yeah. So how would you, as you were going in your career, approach the salary negotiation as a junior developer with little experience?
Yeah, I've actually mentored junior developers. I made all the mistakes. I got my first job and just said, I just threw out a number, which was like so low. In California, I think it was like $60,000. I said, I'll take $60,000 in California, Bay Area, one of the highest, markets in the United States, maybe the world or something like that for
Mhm.
software engineers. They actually paid me a little bit more than that because they were like, oh wow, like that's all you want, kind of thing. Made that huge mistake. I didn't even think about negotiations. I didn't think to even come back and even attempt, because my worst fear was they'd say, "Oh, what? You want that? Get out of here. You don't
Mhm.
deserve that." So I've worked with junior developers, people that graduated boot camps recently, and I always say you have to negotiate. You have to do it because there's a game being played that you're not aware of. You have a budget and you have an upper bound of it and a lower bound of it. And you're not going to give the person on the phone or the person you want to make the offer to the highest offer. You've already identified them as a candidate you want to give the money to. You say, I like this person. We want to get them on the team. We're looking for people. We need people. So you are in a position of power in some way, right? I mean, they're hiring. They need a body there. They need a body that can do this work. And so then people typically get so excited or feel nervous about even asking for more, don't even understand that that's a game that we expect you to play, that they'll take that offer. I'm not going to tell you, hey, you know what? You should ask for more. I'm going to say, great, I'm happy to have you. If you ask
Got
for
a
more,
deal.
yeah, if you ask for like 10 to 15% more, some reasonable amount. I've definitely seen people say, I want double the amount. I'm like, well, that's not going to work. It also makes me question, some things about you.
Yeah, and any reasonable company, even if you give a number that's out of the range, will come back and it's just a conversation.
It's a
It's
conversation.
not an immediate rejection. We're no longer talk to you. You'll have a conversation about clarifying expectations in the salary band for that role.
Yeah.
Um, but it's not an immediate disqualifier.
Absolutely not. And I think people feel that. I certainly felt that way. I thought worst case scenario, I'm desperate. I want this job. I like these people. But ultimately I also realized later on that the reason I left that company so quickly was because I didn't negotiate. So sometimes I think that people come from the idea of like, oh, this is selfish and I shouldn't ask for more money. You should think in 2 years, you're gonna want more money. And if you come in at a higher band, you're going to be less likely to leave. The company actually gets the benefit of keeping you around longer and having you stay and understand their systems more. So now you're an expert. You've come in at a lower pay. They're getting a deal on you. So it's better. It's in both your best interest, in my opinion, to come in at about the highest salary you can.
And to kind of assuade any fear of that conversation, we'll talk a little bit about my own story. I had a job where I asked for, you know, about $20,000 more than what they were
Nice.
hoping to pay. So I got a rejection. Um, and we don't think your skill level really matches the salary that you're asking for, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, so sad.
Yeah.
But I emailed them back. I'm like, well, and they just kind of revealed their hand. They now revealed what like the top end for their actual salary band
Yeah.
was. And I returned back and said, hey, I really want to work at this company. I'm fine with that, a lower number. And they said, okay, actually, great. Here's your offer.
That is interesting. Which they rejected you after you
They
asked for more.
rejected me. Yeah, because I was asking for too much. But then I just came back. It's just a conversation, right?
I like that
It just
move.
goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the failures of the education system. Like, it's not a failure. Like, it's a conversation. We're just two adults talking about options and we're clarifying expectations. So even a rejection doesn't have to be a rejection.
I
If you,
I totally feel that. I've been rejected before, and actually, even I get interviews at the wrong and say, "Hey, I just found the answer." If I'm being truthful, I'm like, "I did actually find the answer. Here they go." And actually, oh, you know what? Let's take you in. But that's a really cool story. Actually, I think that's people's worst fear is that they get rejected, and that's just kind of it. And you did not do that.
yeah, that might be specific to that one company. I'm not sure how broadly applicable that piece of advice is, but I at least just want to let people know that it's just a conversation, and you don't need to stress out too much about it.
I like that.
So you've worked before as a coach for junior developers,
Mhm.
and now you're in a new role at Parsity.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about how Parsity prepares developers to have that career growth discussion so that they can 4x their career quickly after they get that first job?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the big differentiating factors with Parsity is one, we have software engineers that are working software engineers that are your mentors. So they have some real world experience, and you can ask them the kind of questions that you normally couldn't ask a former student that hasn't really been in the field. Also, we have a career services coach, which we pair people with for months after the program for one-on-one career coaching, who actually has experience as a developer within Silicon Valley, working with lots of boot camp grads and software engineers, doing this like as a recruitment service too. So she really knows her stuff and understands like the game of like, okay, let's not just get you a job. Let's do the important part is the negotiation phase too. This can mean a lot more in your salary. And she also helps out with that as well. So that like additional $10,000 to $15,000 that we can get somebody after they get an offer is huge. It sets you on a trajectory, and also just gets you used to the idea that yes, you are going to negotiate. It's not like a thing. Oh, I didn't know that. It's like no, we told you we're going to walk you through this process, so you're fully prepared to do that. And this will help
Yeah,
you
and
out
for
throughout your entire career. I didn't learn this till 3 jobs in, because somebody told me.
so let's jumpstart it and get you moving faster than the slow mos like you and me.
Yeah, I didn't know the game was being played. I mean, yeah, I had no clue.
Yeah, you can't win the game if you don't know the rules of the game.
Absolutely. And it helped. And it was actually working at boot camps. I was a software engineer working at a boot camp in the Bay Area. And I was talking to the other engineers there, and they were kind of discussing salary stuff. And when one guy said he was making like almost a quarter million, and I was like, wait, what? How is that? And I would blew my mind. And then he asked me how much I was making. And I told him their faces dropped. They're like, wait, what? That's it? And I'm like, "In the Bay Area and you got this many years experience, whatever?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I just thought it was normal because at this time, there wasn't Team Blind was not around. There wasn't just as much talk on the internet or places to go to just find this information out. So I just found it out from some dudes at a boot camp.
And I've talked with multiple developers who get really angry when this type of conversation comes up. Oh,
Yeah.
the companies should, give the higher end of the pay band, or companies should take more of a chance on junior developers and upskill them. And it's less about playing the game how you think it should be played, and play the game the way that it
I
is played.
I'm firmly planted in reality. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
a lot of things should be a certain way, but they're not. So I don't even, it just doesn't make sense to me to think about that because I'm like, well, I want to win the actual game I'm playing, not some game in my head or your head.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So as far as parsing information, we'll have a link in the show notes. Talk about some details here, and you're even generous enough to offer a discount to some of the services for being on the podcast. So thank you so much for offering that to our listeners.
Oh,
We'll include some
absolutely.
more
Yeah, I hope to see
details
some of
there.
around. We have some cool programs, Dev 30, which helps you prepare and learn some JavaScript so you can actually be part of the course.
Very good. So then, uh, question as well in career growth in general. We've talked a lot about different subjects here.
hmm
Uh, any parting words of advice for how developers should approach that career growth so that they can 4x that salary sooner than later?
Let me give you some real practical and tactical advice that I think has served me pretty well. At the first job, you should stay, in my opinion, no longer than 1 or 2 years because the first couple jobs are going to be about trajectory and getting more salary, more experience, and breadth of knowledge. And then I think at a certain point, when you're about senior level, you need to stay at one company long enough to get promoted into senior. And from then, you should stay there for maybe a bit, move on again, repaint yourself, reinvent yourself at each new company. Because when you come in, remember, people don't know who you are. Now here's your chance to come in and say, hey, I'm mid-level developer. Hey, I'm senior developer. Hey, I'm engineering manager, and continue this path. So job hopping as a strategy is, in my opinion, the best thing to do. And even when you're not looking, you should be looking. That is one of my top pieces of advice. I think people wait till they either have to look for a job and understand their market value. So either you are out on the market and saying, oh, I thought I was worth this much, and you're not. That's a good indication to maybe stay where you are. Maybe if you're not looking and your nerves aren't frazzled, then going on an interview circuit once a year is probably one of your best bets. That way you understand your market value and what's going to be expected in the interview
Yeah, and part of that is just keeping your LinkedIn up to date. As you get more experience, you'll get more people contacting you with opportunities that are relevant to what you're interested in.
for sure.
And then, revising that LinkedIn maybe once a year to be forward looking, less descriptive of where you've been and more about what that new reinvented version of yourself looks like for the role that you're trying to get.
Totally.
Um,
Resume, same thing. Yeah.
yeah, resume, same thing. Because really, at the end of the day, humans are we're biased creatures.
Yeah.
I say that in the sense that if you get hired as a junior developer, you may get promoted even multiple times at a company you stay for at a long time for a long time.
hmm
But some people that were around when you were brand new and knew nothing, they might still perceive you as a junior developer who knows nothing. So sometimes the only way to get that fresh start and that get surrounded with people that are encouraging you around that new path is to, reinvent yourself, as you mentioned.
Spot on. Yeah.
Well, Brian, it's great having you on to the podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully this conversation was helpful to any new developer who's trying to understand how they should be positioning themselves as they start their new career. So thank you, Brian, for joining, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in to the Junior Jobs Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to like and subscribe, as that helps us reach more developers in need. And don't forget to check the show notes for details on today's sponsor and other job search services that we provide.